There's a moment in MotoGP when a motorcycle stops being a machine and becomes a verdict. And in 2025, Ducati delivered one so brutal, so brilliantly engineered, it exposed the limits of human riding itself. Because the GP25 wasn't built to be ridden, it was built to be survived. Inside those Bologna garages, the data screens didn't lie. Front-end load spikes beyond safe thresholds, brake pressure signatures normal riders physically couldn't repeat, chassis flex patterns that demanded reactions faster than conscious thought. The bike didn't offer feedback, it challenged it. It snapped sideways through entry, demanded micro-corrections in milliseconds, punished hesitation with violent instability. Riders tried to tame it. The bike punished them for trying. But one man didn't resist the chaos. He merged with it. Where others searched for balance, Marc Márquez rode into the instability like it was oxygen. The GP25's wild telemetry matched only one rider's nervous system, one whose instincts fire faster than fear, whose brain interprets front-end collapse as an opportunity instead of disaster. That's the truth Ducati never said aloud. They didn't create a bike for everyone. They created a bike to test who still deserved a place at the top of the sport. And in that test, the margin wasn't talent, it was survival. So the real question isn't why Marc won, it's why nobody else could even hold on long enough to understand what the GP25 truly was. A masterpiece, a weapon, and Ducati's most dangerous confession. Ducati entered 2025 with the quiet arrogance of a dynasty, moving pieces inside the paddock with the cold precision of a watchmaker whose gears no longer needed to hide the sound of their grinding intentions. And in Mugello 2024, that illusion of neutrality finally shattered as Marc Márquez's refusal to join Pramac triggered a chain reaction that felt less like negotiation and more like the coronation of an heir. Tardozzi stood at the center of it all with the posture of a man who already knew the ending, while Chiabatti played the soft-spoken diplomat, smoothing edges that were never meant to be smooth. Daligna, meanwhile, carried notebooks filled with sketches of evolutions no one else had been permitted to see. "This isn't a transfer," an engineer whispered. "It's a restructuring in plain sight." In those days, the Ducati garage became a stage where light clung differently to each rider. The red glow felt ceremonial, almost judicial. Bagnaia sensed the shift before anyone said a word, telling himself, "I can feel the center of gravity moving without a single bolt being touched." One little-known detail circulated among insiders. The internal GPS comparison sheets stopped referencing Pecco's baseline first and began aligning every metric to Marc's violent corner entry signature. The switch was subtle, like a river quietly changing course. Ducati no longer responded to results. They responded to prophecy. Márquez arrived carrying sparks in his eyes, sparks that lit up places in the factory no one had dared illuminate since Stoner. The team moved as if pulled by a magnetic field they didn't entirely understand. Bagnaia tried to read the room, but the room had stopped speaking his language. "We welcome evolution," Chiabatti said publicly, though his tone betrayed a sense of inevitability. Reporters noticed the tension, but misread it as rivalry rather than structural realignment. The empire had chosen its gravity. Like a tree bending toward a new sun, every branch followed, and in that moment, the facade collapsed, revealing the truth Ducati could no longer hide. Once an empire selects its god, the rest of the universe must adapt or vanish. The GP25 emerged from the factory like a riddle wrapped in carbon fiber, a machine whose every line implied that compromise had been exiled from Ducati's vocabulary. And engineers quietly admitted its new aerodynamic package created a deliberate instability on corner entry that only a rare kind of rider could read instead of fear. Its downforce maps sharpened the nose, but made the bike dart unpredictably under heavy braking, demanding reflexes faster than logic. "This bike reacts before you finish thinking," one mechanic murmured, wiping sweat from a fairing that still radiated heat from testing. The torque delivery was equally unforgiving, spiking earlier in the rev range so violently that only micro-corrections within 30 milliseconds could keep the rear aligned. "How do you tame something that wants to leap ahead of you?" Marc wondered during one of his first runs, though the thought came with a grin rather than dread. Bagnaia, by contrast, felt the front tire speaking in an unfamiliar dialect. The steering geometry had shifted subtly, just 2.3 millimeters in trail reduction, Yet that tiny alteration bent physics into a shape only Márquez's chaos could inhabit. Observers noted the bike twitched mid-lean, like a nervous animal smelling a storm. The GP24 had been democratic. The GP25 was monastic. It rewarded instinct over method. It punished hesitation as if coded to detect it. The chassis flexed aggressively under maximum load, creating sensations described by one tester as surfing on a blade. Even its electronics package had been recalibrated with reduced intervention zones, letting the front dive deeper before assistance kicked in. "It wants a rider who dances with mistakes," Daligna stated cryptically. Pecco felt it more plainly. The bike no longer waited for him. Each lap revealed a personality too sharp to neutralize. The GP25 didn't ask for mastery. It demanded surrender. And in that demand, Ducati revealed its most dangerous secret. The bike had chosen its rider long before the rider touched the throttle. Pecco Bagnaia entered each lap like a composer, searching for the precise note that would make the bike breathe with him, relying on stability, gentle front loading, and mid-corner clarity to shape a rhythm only he could hear, while Marc Márquez attacked the same asphalt as if guided by impulses too fast for conscious intention. Where Pecco traced arcs, Marc carved fractures. "Their styles aren't opposite," an engineer whispered. "They're incompatible." Pecco's smoother throttle application required a predictable tire contact patch, a detail measurable in the telemetry, as a remarkably linear grip trace that revealed his trust in gradual weight transfer. Marc's data looked like a seismograph, unstable yet strangely coherent. How can he live in that noise? Pecco wondered as he studied charts that felt like a foreign alphabet. Marc, meanwhile, felt alive only when the front end trembled. He thrived in microcorrections so fast they resembled instinct rather than technique. The Ducati garage became a cathedral, with two religions preaching from opposite altars. Bagnaia sought calm entry phases, exploiting progressive load to settle the chassis. Márquez forced the fork into violent compression, allowing the bike to pivot unnaturally tight. Even the mechanics adapted their language depending on which rider stood before them. "He needs the bike to tell him secrets," one said about Pecco, "but Marc wants it to scream." This collision of philosophies created an invisible tectonic pressure through every session. The GP25 amplified their differences until the gap felt spiritual rather than mechanical. Observers sensed that what was unfolding wasn't a rivalry, but a philosophical duel written in lean angle and terror. And it all crystallized in one truth: no temple can hold two gods without the walls beginning to crack. Bagnaia began 2025 sensing a faint shift in the garage air, a subtle rearrangement of glances and gestures, and soon the mechanics who once gravitated toward his side of the box drifted toward Márquez with an ease that felt rehearsed rather than accidental. Tools migrated before explanations did. "We're just optimizing workflow," someone said, though the tone suggested a truth left intentionally opaque. The engineer's listening posture changed too, leaning in a little closer when Marc spoke, taking notes faster, reacting quicker, as if his feedback arrived preloaded with destiny. "Why am I suddenly translating my own bike?" Pecco asked himself after another session, where the GP25 delivered sensations that contradicted his instincts. A little-known detail spread among insiders. The software updates for corner entry stability were tested exclusively with Marc's telemetry, rather than the dual reference used in prior years. Bagnaia tried to adapt, but the bike's language had shifted into sharp syllables he could no longer soften. Public statements from Ducati only deepened the fracture. "He deserves our maximum help," Tardozzi said, yet it landed more like a memorial than a reassurance. Reporters sensed melancholy in the phrasing. The team's body language confirmed it. Every debrief positioned Marc at the center of the conversation. Every technical briefing orbited his vocabulary. The gulf widened quietly, like two clocks drifting out of sync. Pecco felt his confidence thinning with every outing, reduced to deciphering a machine that once trusted him completely. Even the way the garage lights caught the red fairings seemed different, illuminating Marc with a brightness Pecco could no longer claim. "We'll fix it soon," someone promised, but hope felt like an echo in an abandoned room. The fall didn't come in a crash or a headline. It came in silence, and Bagnaia finally understood the truth no champion ever wants to face. Losing time hurts, but losing your kingdom destroys you. The paddock felt the shockwave of Ducati's 2025 shift long before the standings confirmed it, a pressure change in the atmosphere that made mechanics speak softer and team managers walk faster, as if the balance of MotoGP had been tilted a few degrees without warning. KTM reacted first. Frustration etched into every meeting, knowing their explosive RC16 updates suddenly looked insufficient against a GP25 tuned around Marquez's impossible limits. Aprilia grew anxious too, whispering that losing Alex's development intelligence would leave them exposed in an arms race they hadn't planned for. Are we all just chasing a ghost now? One rival engineer wondered, while watching Marc's telemetry scroll like a dare. Yamaha and Honda observed with a mix of disbelief and resignation, each realizing the sport was drifting further from their control with every session. It's a new era, whether we like it or not, an HRC insider admitted. Even the wind through the pit lane felt sharper during Marc's runs. Jorge Martin studied Ducati's internal reshuffling with unease, sensing the ladder he had once climbed was being rebuilt beneath his feet. Pedro Acosta watched with hungry eyes, seeing opportunity disguised as chaos. Quartararo shook his head during debriefs, muttering that the sport's ecosystem had become a machine feeding one rider. A little-known technical detail spread rapidly. Several teams adjusted their aerodynamics based on simulations of following the GP25 specifically, rather than improving their own baselines. It was a kind of surrender. The paddock's conversations became coded and clipped. Every rider sensed the gravity shifting. Their body language tightened, shoulders raised, breaths shorter. It was as if the sport itself had inhaled but refused to exhale. "This isn't dominance," a Ducati mechanic said quietly. "It's recalibration." The tension became physical, lingering in garages like static before a storm. In that charged silence, the MotoGP world understood the scale of what had begun. Ducati hadn't won a championship. They had redrawn the map. The satellite teams felt the consequences of Ducati's internal realignment like distant provinces forced to adopt a new language. Overnight, and VR46 was the first to voice what everyone else feared. The GP25's evolution no longer included them in its logic. Di Giannantonio exited tests shaking his head, admitting the front offered a feeling that disappears right when you need it most. A complaint that echoed in the telemetry as inconsistent load readings through long corners. VR46 engineers gathered in hushed corners, quietly lobbying for a rollback that they knew would never come. Why are we riding a bike designed for someone else's instincts? A rider wondered during a restless debrief. The GP24 users were no better off, discovering that updates meant to unify performance actually fractured it. "The bike reacts like it owes us nothing," one crew chief muttered. A small but revealing technical detail circulated. Several satellite bikes showed an 8% increase in fork chatter under identical settings used in 2024, a sign the front was now calibrated for a far more aggressive load pattern. Tracks that once rewarded smoothness now punished it. Riders felt the bike's intentions pulling away from their own. They adapted, but the machine resisted. The garage tension thickened, invisible yet undeniable. Even the sound of the bike's idling felt different, nervous, impatient, untamed. VR46 technicians exchanged looks that spoke more truth than any meeting. "We're chasing a bike that wasn't built for us," someone finally admitted aloud. The satellites realized their machinery reflected a philosophy they had never chosen, chaos programmed in the image of a single rider. Their rebellion was quiet but constant, a simmering refusal hidden beneath forced smiles. And as each session passed with more questions than answers, one truth solidified, like frost over metal. When an empire crowns one general, every distant province feels the cost. Pecco entered 2026 with the sensation of stepping onto a narrowing bridge. Every test and race transformed into a quiet verdict delivered by engineers who no longer hid the stopwatch behind polite smiles, and each update felt like a political signal more than a performance boost. Ducati's patience had become procedural rather than emotional. "This year defines everything," a team insider murmured, offering clarity with the softness of a curtain being pulled shut. The list of potential successors, Aldeguer, Acosta, Martin, Toprak, hovered like shadows stretching toward his seat. "How do you race when the future is already warming up in your mirrors?" Pecco wondered during a Barcelona test, where his feedback seemed to dissolve before reaching the engineer's notebooks. A technical detail stung him more than any headline. The new mid-corner stability patch was developed using Marc's braking phase telemetry rather than his own, a silent confirmation of Ducati's chosen direction. Reporters dissected every word he spoke, hungry for signs of fracture. Every press statement sounded coded. Even compliments carried expiration dates. Ducati's language became clinical, careful, almost ceremonial in its restraint. The tension thickened like air before rainfall. Bagnaia moved through the paddock with dignity, but the strain pressed into his shoulders. He wasn't fighting Marc anymore. He was fighting the erosion of the identity he'd built brick by brick. Tests felt heavier, races felt final. The garage lights seemed to dim around him at moments he needed brightness most. "We believe in him," Tardozzi insisted, though belief now resembled a courtesy. And as Pecco tightened his gloves before the first race of the season, he understood with terrifying clarity that time, not talent, had become his fiercest opponent. In 2026, Bagnaia wasn't defending a title. He was defending his place in the story. Ducati's final truth revealed itself not in a press release or a defeat, but in the quiet mathematics of performance, where loyalty dissolves the moment a rider's instincts fall 1/10 behind the pace of evolution. And in 2025, that gap became the fault line between greatness and history. Bagnaia felt it in the way the bike reacted to him, respectful but no longer aligned. Márquez felt it in the way the bike anticipated his chaos before he delivered it. "The sport moves faster than the people inside it," an engineer admitted, with a hint of sorrow. The GP25's data confirmed what emotions tried to deny. The machine had found a rider whose neural timing matched its most violent thresholds. A rarely mentioned telemetry insight showed Marc correcting front-end slides 12% quicker than Pecco, a microscopic difference with catastrophic consequences. How did my ceiling become the limit instead of the benchmark? Pecco wondered during a late-season debrief, where silence spoke louder than words. Ducati didn't choose between them. They followed the trajectory of potential. Marc's ceiling stretched toward legend. Pecco's remained anchored in mastery. The garage, once balanced, shifted its orbit naturally. Evolution is never sentimental. Even the sound of the engines reflected the divergence, like two instruments once in harmony, now playing in different keys. Tardozzi tried to soften the truth, saying, "Both are exceptional, yet the tone betrayed the hierarchy beneath the praise. The empire didn't betray its general. It simply outgrew the battlefield he knew." Bagnaia stood brave, but the ground beneath him had already turned. Márquez marched forward not by politics, but by the violence of his talent. Ducati followed the future because futures cannot be delayed. 2025 wasn't a championship. It was a metamorphosis. And metamorphosis by nature sheds what can no longer transform. In the end, the story wasn't about who won, but about who the bike chose to follow into tomorrow.